Ever stood on a frozen lake and felt the ice shift beneath you? Some say they hear voices below. Others say things move just under the surface. And sometimes, the ice breaks when it shouldn't. Tonight, you'll hear 12 disturbing stories from frozen lakes around the world, chilling encounters, lost memories, and things better left beneath the ice. Have you ever experienced something strange near a frozen lake? Share your story in the comments below. Now, breathe deep and let the cold settle in. Story 1. Frozen Echoes. I was never one for dares, but something about Derek's smirk that winter evening in the schoolyard made my blood boil. The air was sharp, slicing through my jacket as I stood with Lloyd, my best friend since 3rd grade, by the chain-link fence. Derek, the kind of guy who thrived on making others squirm, leaned against a lamppost, his breath fogging in the cold. "You two are too scared to cross Saul Laskin," he taunted, pointing toward the frozen lake just beyond the school's edge. "It's been solid since October. Perfectly safe. Unless you're chickens." Lloyd shifted beside me, his sneakers crunching the snow. He was smaller than me, wiry, with glasses that always slid down his nose. "It's not about being scared," he muttered, but his voice wavered. I could feel his hesitation, and it only fueled my resolve. Derek's cronies snickered, their eyes glinting with malice. I wasn't going to let them win. "Fine," I snapped, meeting Derek's gaze. "We'll do it. We'll walk to the center of the lake. You coming, or are you the one chickening out?" The words felt reckless as they left my mouth, but the challenge was set. Derek's smirk widened, and he shrugged like it was nothing. "I'll be watching," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. The lake wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk through the snow-dusted woods. Saul Laskin was a local legend, not for beauty but for its reputation. Kids whispered about it, about strange sounds at night, about shapes moving under the ice. I'd always dismissed the stories as nonsense, the kind of thing people made up to scare each other. But as Lloyd and I trudged toward the shore, the air grew heavier, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky a sickly orange, and a faint fog was already curling over the lake's surface. "You sure about this?" Lloyd asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He adjusted his scarf, his fingers trembling. I wanted to say something reassuring, but my own heart was pounding. "It's just a walk," I said, forcing confidence. "We'll be back in 20 minutes, and Derek will eat his words." The ice stretched out before us, a vast, grey-white sheet shrouded in mist. It looked solid enough, though patches of frost obscured its clarity. I tested it with one foot, then another, feeling the cold seep through my boots. It held. "See," I said, glancing at Lloyd. "Solid." He nodded, but his eyes darted to the fog, which was thickening fast, swallowing the far shore. Derek and his crew stayed back, their silhouettes barely visible through the haze. I could still hear their laughter, faint and mocking. We started walking, the ice creaking softly under our weight. Each step echoed, a low groan that seemed to come from deep within the lake. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the center, maybe 100 yards out. The fog closed in, muffling the world until it was just me and Lloyd, two shadows on a frozen stage. "This is stupid," Lloyd muttered, his breath puffing out in clouds. "Why are we even doing this?" "Because Derek's a jerk," I said, but the words felt hollow. The air was wrong, too still, too heavy. My skin prickled, not from the cold, but from something else, something watching. I glanced back, but the shore was gone, lost in the fog. "Let's just get to the center and head back," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. We were halfway there when I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a moan carried on the wind. Lloyd froze. "You hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide behind his glasses. I nodded, my heart thudding. "Probably just the ice," I said, but I didn't believe it. Ice didn't sound like that, didn't carry that kind of weight, like something alive and in pain. We kept moving, slower now, each step deliberate. The fog was so thick I could barely see Lloyd beside me. Then it came again, louder, closer, a voice, unmistakably a voice, muttering words I couldn't make out. I grabbed Lloyd's arm, pulling him to a stop. "What is that?" I hissed. He shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, man. Let's go back." But before we could turn, a shape emerged from the fog. At first, I thought it was Derek, pulling some prank, but as it drew closer, my stomach twisted. It was a man, or something that used to be a man. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that jutted unnaturally. Its eyes were the worst, blank, like broken mirrors, reflecting nothing. It shuffled toward us, its movements jerky, like a puppet with half its strings cut. "I did it," it rasped, its voice a dry, cracked whisper. "Where is she? Where's my baby?" Lloyd whimpered, backing away, but I was rooted to the spot, my legs refusing to move. The thing's head snapped toward him, those empty eyes locking on. "You said if I did it, you'd tell me where she was." It shrieked, its voice spitting the air. It lunged, faster than I thought possible, and grabbed Lloyd by the shoulders. He screamed, a sound I'd never heard from him, raw and terrified. I wanted to move to help, but fear held me like a vice. The creature slammed Lloyd down onto the ice, again and again, each impact sending cracks spiderwebbing out. Blood smeared the surface, steaming in the cold. "Where is she?" It howled, its voice no longer human, a sound that clawed at my mind. Lloyd's screams stopped, his body limp, and still the thing kept going, relentless. Finally, my legs unlocked. I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the ice. Behind me, I heard it, a sharp, explosive crack, like the lake itself was breaking apart. I glanced down and saw it, a jagged gash, lightning-shaped, tearing through the ice toward me. My heart lurched. I pushed harder, my breath ragged, my lungs burning. The shore was nowhere in sight, just endless fog and that awful sound of the ice splitting. Then it happened. The ground gave way beneath me, and I plunged into the water. The cold was a shock, 1,000 needles stabbing every inch of my skin. I flailed, my arms heavy, my clothes dragging me down. The darkness was absolute, the water thick and black, like it was swallowing me whole. My lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't find the surface. My vision blurred, my thoughts slowing, and just as I felt myself slipping away, a hand grabbed my arm. I broke the surface, gasping, choking on the freezing air. It was Derek, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. It's okay," he stammered, hauling me onto the ice. He threw his parka over me, his hands shaking as he tried to warm me. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, my body trembling uncontrollably. "Lloyd," I croaked, but Derek just shook his head, his expression grim. We crawled toward the shore, the ice groaning beneath us. I kept waiting for it to crack again, for that thing to rise from the water, but it didn't. The fog began to lift as we reached the edge, the trees coming into view. Derek helped me stand, his arm around my shoulders, but when I looked back, the lake was still, silent, as if nothing had happened. No sign of Lloyd, no sign of the creature. We stumbled back to the schoolyard, where Derek's friends were waiting, their faces pale. They'd seen nothing, heard nothing, but the fear in their eyes told me they knew something was wrong. Someone called for help, and soon I was in an ambulance, wrapped in blankets, my teeth chattering. The paramedics asked questions, but I couldn't answer. How could I explain what I'd seen? What I'd let happen to Lloyd? In the hospital, they told me I'd been lucky. Hypothermia, they said, but I'd recover. They found no trace of Lloyd or Derek on the lake. Search teams scoured the ice for days, but it was as if they'd vanished. The police said I must have imagined it, that the cold had messed with my head. They said people don't just disappear like that, that there was no evidence of anyone else out there. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. I still see it sometimes in my dreams, the figure in the fog, its broken mirror eyes, its voice demanding answers I didn't have. I hear Lloyd's screams, the crack of the ice, the splash as I went under. I see Derek's face, pale and desperate, pulling me from the water. And I wonder why me? Why did I survive when they didn't? The lake is still there, just beyond the schoolyard. Kids still talk about it, still dare each other to walk across it. But I don't go near it. I don't need to. Whatever was out there that night, it's still there waiting. And I know, deep down, that it's not done with me yet. Story 2. The Serpent Beneath the Ice. I'm Ryan Collins, a biologist with a knack for chasing myths. Not because I believe them, but because they often hide something real, something science can pin down. Lake Utopia, New Brunswick, was my latest obsession. The locals whispered about a creature, a serpent from First Nations lore, said to lurk beneath the frozen surface, capable of shattering ice to snatch at those foolish enough to tread above. I'd read the accounts on archival sites and skimmed Wikipedia entries about similar legends, like the one at Flathead Lake, where a monster's antlers tricked 2 girls centuries ago. The stories were eerie, sure, but I saw them as puzzles. My colleagues, Emily and Mark, were game to join me on the ice under a full moon in January 2025, armed with drones, lanterns, and thermal cameras. We were here to debunk the myth, or find something worth studying. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the moon's pale glow. The air stung my face, sharp and biting, as we trudged a 1/4 mile onto the ice. It was thick, solid under our boots, but the silence felt wrong, heavy, like the lake was holding its breath. Emily adjusted her drone's controls, its faint buzz the only sound besides our footsteps. Mark, always a skeptic, chuckled, "If this thing's real, I'll eat my hat." I forced a grin, but my gut twisted. The stories described a creature that could sense you, track you through the ice. I shook it off, just folklore, I told myself. Then the ice groaned. It wasn't loud, not at first, a low, grinding hum, like stone dragging across stone. We froze. My breath caught as I scanned the surface. Nothing, just smooth, endless white. Emily's drone hovered above, its camera sweeping the ice. "Maybe it's just settling," she said, but her voice wavered. Mark pointed his flashlight at the ground, the beam cutting through the dark. The ice was clear in spots, revealing the black water below, still as death. Another groan, louder this time. The ice shuddered beneath us, a jolt that sent my heart into my throat. A crack splintered outward, a jagged line like a lightning bolt, splitting the surface between us. I stumbled back, my boots slipping. In the slit of darkness where the ice parted, something moved. It was fast, sinuous, a black shape gliding just beneath the surface, too big to be a fish, too deliberate to be a current. Emily gasped, her lantern slipping from her gloved hands. It hit the ice and rolled, casting wild shadows. "Run," I shouted. We bolted toward the shore, the ice trembling under our feet. The crack widened, chasing us, a deafening snap echoing in the night. I glanced back, stupidly, and saw the hole. It wasn't just a crack anymore, it was a gaping maw, black water churning inside. Something broke the surface, just for a second, a glint of slick, scaled skin, catching the moonlight before vanishing. My stomach lurched. Mark was ahead, shouting for us to keep moving. Emily was beside me, her breath ragged. We hit the shore, collapsing onto the snow, hearts pounding. Panting, I looked back. The ice was still, but ripples spread from the hole, faint and unnatural, carrying shards of broken ice. Whatever it was had surfaced, maybe even pushed a chunk of ice upward before sinking again. My mind raced. A fish? An eel? No, it was too big, too fast. I tried to rationalize it, but the image of that black shape burned into my brain. "Where's Emily?" Mark's voice cut through my thoughts. I spun around. She wasn't there. Her drone lay abandoned on the snow, its propellers still spinning. My chest tightened. She was right behind me, I said, my voice shaking. We called her name, our shouts swallowed by the wind. Nothing. The lake stared back, silent and mocking. Mark grabbed my arm. "We need to go back for her." I nodded, but fear called at me. The stories flashed through my mind, tales of people vanishing on the ice, dragged into the depths. I grabbed a rope from our gear, tying it around my waist, and handed the other end to Mark. "If something happens, pull me back," I said. He nodded, his face pale. With a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, I stepped back onto the ice. The wind howled, biting through my jacket. The ice felt different now, alive, like it was watching me. I called for Emily, my voice cracking. The beam of my flashlight swept across the surface, catching glints of frost. The hole we'd fled was still there, its edges jagged, the water inside black and still. I crept closer, my heart hammering. "Emily," I shouted again. No answer. Then I saw it, a faint trail in the snow, leading away from the hole. Not footprints, but drag marks like something heavy had been pulled across the ice. My blood ran cold. I followed the trail, the rope taut behind me. It led to another crack, smaller, half hidden by snow. I knelt, shining my light into the gap. The water was murky, but something glinted below, a piece of Emily's scarf caught on a shard of ice. My stomach dropped. She was down there. Before I could think, a shadow moved in the water. It was huge, coiling, its outline blurred but unmistakable. I stumbled back, the rope yanking tight as Mark pulled. "Ryan, get out of there," he shouted, but I couldn't leave her. I swung the crowbar at the ice, trying to widen the crack, to see if she was trapped below. The ice gave way too easily, splitting with a sickening crunch. Water surged up, cold and black, and something brushed against my boot, smooth, like polished leather, but alive. I screamed, scrambling back. The ice shook again, harder this time. A low, guttural sound rose from below, not a growl, but a vibration, like the lake itself was humming with rage. I ran, the rope burning against my waist as Mark hauled me toward the shore. The ice cracked behind me, a spiderweb of fractures spreading out. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We reached the shore, and I collapsed, gasping. Mark was shaking, his flashlight beam darting across the ice. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. My mind was on Emily. I'd seen her scarf, felt that thing under the ice. She was gone, wasn't she? Dragged into the depths by whatever lived down there. Guilt twisted in my chest. This was my idea, my stupid quest to chase a myth. But then, a scream. Faint, panicked, human. It was Emily. I shot to my feet, scanning the darkness. A figure stumbled toward us, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was her, covered in ice shavings, her eyes wild with terror. "It grabbed me," she cried, collapsing into my arms. Her jacket was torn, her hands scraped raw. "It pulled me under, Ryan. I don't know how I got out." We dragged her to the bonfire we'd built earlier, wrapping her in blankets. She was shaking, her breath coming in gasps. "It was huge," she whispered. "Like an eel, but bigger, with eyes that glowed. It let go of me like it was playing." Her words chilled me more than the air. Playing. The stories hadn't mentioned that. They'd warned of a serpent that hunted, that broke the ice to claim its prey. But playing? That felt worse, like it wasn't just hungry, it was cruel. We stayed by the fire, too scared to move. The lake was quiet now, but I could feel it watching us. Every creak of the trees, every gust of wind, made me flinch. Emily clutched my hand, her grip bruising. "We shouldn't have come here," she said. I nodded, my throat tight. The archival records, the Wikipedia pages, they weren't just stories. They were warnings. Disturb the ice, and something ancient wakes up. Hours passed, the fire dying to embers. We decided to leave, to get as far from the lake as possible. But as we packed our gear, the ice groaned again. Not a crack this time, but a slow, deliberate scrape, like something massive was dragging itself beneath the surface, circling us. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it across the lake. The beam caught a ripple, then another, moving in a perfect circle around the hole we'd fled. In the center, just for a moment, two glints of light flashed, eyes, reflective and unblinking, staring right at me. We didn't wait for it to come closer. We ran, piling into the truck, the engine roaring to life. As we sped away, I looked back through the rearview mirror. The lake was still, the moon's reflection unbroken, but I knew it was there, waiting, just beneath the ice. Days later, back in the city, I couldn't shake it. I pored over the records again, _eek.lac-back.gigs.ca, old First Nations accounts, even the Flathead Lake story on Wikipedia. They all said the same thing. The serpent was old, older than the lakes themselves, a guardian or a predator, depending on who told the tale. I tried to write it off as a hallucination, a trick of the light. But Emily's torn jacket, the drag marks, the scarf, they were real. And so was the fear in her eyes. I haven't gone back to Lake Utopia. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes at night, I hear that scraping sound in my dreams, feel the ice trembling beneath my feet, and I wonder if it's still out there, circling, waiting for someone else to disturb the ice. Story 3. Frozen Terror. I'm Lewis Sweet, an ice fisherman from the shores of Lake Michigan, and this is the story of how I survived 7 days adrift on a frozen hell in January 1929. The lake was my life, its moods, its depths, its cruel indifference. I'd spent years hauling fish from its icy grip, but nothing prepared me for the terror that began on January 22. The morning was bitter, the kind of cold that claws at your bones. The other fishermen were packing up, muttering about a nor'easter brewing. They urged me to leave, but I was stubborn, greedy for one more catch. My shanty, a rickety wooden box on runners, sat a mile out on the frozen lake, surrounded by a vast sheet of ice that creaked underfoot. I told myself I'd be quick, just one more fish. 30 minutes later, the world turned against me. A low rumble, like a distant train, shook the ice. I froze, my hands gripping a line. Then came a sharp crunch, the sound of the lake tearing itself apart. I bolted out of the shanty, my boots slipping on the slick surface. To the east, a jagged black line snaked across the ice, widening as I watched. The floe was breaking. I sprinted toward shore, my breath ragged, but the gap was already too wide, a 10-foot channel of dark, churning water. I skidded to a stop, heart pounding. The ice groaned beneath me, tilting slightly. I turned back to the shanty, thinking I could wait it out, but the crack was spreading, splitting the floe like a shattered pane of glass. Half the shanty broke away, sliding into the water with a sickening splash. I grabbed my axe and a frozen lake trout I caught earlier, my only possessions now, and ran. The shore was a fading smudge in the distance. The wind howled, carrying shards of ice that stung my face. I stumbled, my legs burning, and collapsed behind a low ridge of snow. I piled more snow with my hands, building a crude wall to shield me from the gale. The lake was alive, shifting and cracking, and I was trapped on a shrinking island of ice. By midday, I was drifting. The shore vanished, swallowed by a grey haze. I passed Wargoshen's Island, close enough to see the lighthouse crib, its concrete base looming like a ghost in the storm. For a moment, I thought the floe might ground there, but a sudden lurch carried me past. The wind screamed, and the cold sank deeper, numbing my fingers and toes. I clutched the trout, its frozen scales biting into my palm, and the axe, my only tool for survival. Night fell, and the darkness was absolute. The floe rocked gently, a cradle in a nightmare. I curled up behind my snow wall, my body shaking uncontrollably. The stars were hidden by clouds, and the only sound was the ice grinding against itself. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Every creak, every shift, felt like the lake preparing to swallow me whole. At dawn, the floe jolted, slamming against something solid. I staggered to my feet, my legs stiff as boards, and saw it. White Shoals Light, a concrete tower rising 22 feet above the water, its base encrusted in ice. Shelter, supplies, salvation. but the ladder to the platform was sheathed in a foot of ice, the rungs barely visible. I swung my axe, chips flying, each strike sending shocks through my frozen hands. Hours passed. My fingers bled, my feet went numb, and I was still 3 rungs short. I collapsed, staring up at the platform, so close yet unreachable. The wind mocked me, whistling through the tower. I was going to die here, feet from rescue, my body a frozen relic on this godforsaken floe. Desperation clawed at my mind, and I looked at the broken ice around me, chunks scattered like tombstones. An idea sparked, mad and reckless. I began piling the ice blocks, dragging them with hands I could no longer feel. The floe shifted beneath me, threatening to tip me into the water. I worked through the pain, stacking the chunks into a crude ramp against the tower's base. My breath came in gasps, my vision blurred, but I kept going. I had to. The ramp grew, uneven and treacherous, until it reached the lip of the platform. I climbed, slipping, my axe wedged into the ice for leverage. My body screamed, my muscles burned, but I dragged myself over the edge, collapsing onto the concrete. I lay there half dead, the wind still tearing at me, but I was alive. Inside the lighthouse, I found a miracle: a small catch of fuel, canned food, and a first aid kit. I bandaged my hands, ate sparingly, and burned a few sticks of wood to warm my core. The tower was a hollow shell, its walls coated in frost, but it was shelter. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The next 5 days were a blur of survival. The floe kept drifting, the tower swaying with it. I rationed the food, sipping melted ice for water. The cold was relentless, seeping through the concrete, but I stayed alive by moving, pacing the small platform and keeping the fire going. The lake was a monster, its surface a maze of cracks and pressure ridges. I saw no boats, no planes, nothing but ice and sky. On the 7th morning, January 29, the floe grounded again, this time near Sturgeon Bay. I didn't know if it would hold, but I couldn't stay in the tower any longer. I gathered my axe and the frozen trout, my strange talismans, and set out across the ice. The shore was a distant line, but I walked, each step a battle against the wind and my own exhaustion. The ice groaned beneath me, threatening to give way, but I kept moving. Near noon, I reached a steep bluff at Cross Village. My legs buckled and I fell to my knees. A man was passing by, his figure blurred in the snow. I called out, my voice hoarse, barely audible. He stopped, staring at me like I was a ghost. I held up my axe and the trout, the only proof of what I'd endured. "Help," I croaked. He pulled me to my feet, and I stumbled into the warmth of a nearby house. The ordeal was over, but the lake's grip lingered. I could still hear the ice cracking, feel the cold in my bones. I faced the frozen terror of Lake Michigan and survived, not by luck, but by will, instinct, and the battered tools in my hands. The story spread like wildfire, a tale of one man against an unforgiving lake. But for me, it's no legend. It's the weight of every step, the sting of every gust, the memory of a flow that nearly became my grave. I'm Lewis Sweet, and this is how I lived through 7 days of frozen hell. Story 4, Frozen Echoes. The snowplow's engine growled as I guided it up the winding, snow-choked road to the lake cabin. My hands, knuckles white on the wheel, trembled not from the cold, but from the weight of memory. 20 years ago, my brother, Ethan, drowned in this lake, his body dragged from the ice by searchers who called it an accident. No one could explain why he'd been out there alone, or why the ice had given way beneath him. I hadn't returned since, but now at 35, I needed solitude, a place to face the ghosts that still whispered his name. The cabin loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the frozen lake, its windows like empty eyes. I parked the plow, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow, and hauled my duffel bag inside. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and damp. I lit the wood stove, its faint crackle my only company as the storm outside grew fiercer. Sleet battered the windows, and the wind howled, carrying sounds that seemed almost human, distant, keening wails that made my skin prickle. I told myself it was just the storm, just the isolation playing tricks. But the lake had always felt alive, its depths hiding something I could never name. Around midnight, a sharp crack split the air, loud enough to jolt me from my chair. My heart thudded. It wasn't the storm. It was too precise, too close. I knew that sound from childhood winters, the ice shifting, pressure cracks forming as the lake groaned under its own weight. Ethan had taught me that. Ice talks, he'd said, grinning, his breath puffing in the cold. You just have to listen. I didn't want to listen now, but I couldn't ignore it. Every instinct screamed to stay inside, to huddle by the stove, but I needed to know. I pulled on my parka, gloves, and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit like a fist, snow stinging my face as I descended the path to the lake. The beam of my flashlight danced across the ice, revealing a vast, frozen expanse that shimmered under the storm's assault. I stepped onto the surface, cautious, testing each step. The ice groaned beneath me, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through my boots. I moved toward the center of the lake, where the crack had sounded loudest. My breath came in shallow gasps, the cold already seeping through my layers. I remembered a story I'd read years ago on Outdoor Life about a fisherman, Lewis Sweet, stranded on a drifting ice floe. He'd survived by pacing, forcing his body to generate heat despite the biting wind. I wasn't stranded, but the cold was just as deadly. I kept moving, my boots crunching against the snow-dusted ice, refusing to let the chill settle into my bones. Then I saw it, a pale shape tumbling through the blizzard, caught in the beam of my flashlight. A child's scarf, tattered and blue, skittering across the ice like it had a life of its own. My stomach twisted. Ethan had worn a scarf like that, bright blue with frayed ends, the last thing I'd seen him in before he vanished. I chased it, my boots slipping as the wind pushed me back. The scarf snagged on something, flapping wildly, and I stopped short. A jagged crack split the ice, its edges glinting like broken glass. The water beneath was black, endless, and wrong. I knelt, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and that's when I saw them. Hands. Small, pale hands, clawing at the underside of the ice, their fingers scraping against the frozen surface. A face pressed up from below, a teenage boy, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Bubbles streamed from his lips as he pounded weakly against the ice. My heart stopped. He was alive, trapped, drowning. I dropped to my knees, slamming my flashlight against the ice to widen the crack. "Hold on," I shouted, my voice swallowed by the wind. The ice was thick, unyielding, but I kept striking, my hands aching with each blow. Finally, the cracks splintered, and I reached into the freezing water, grabbing his wrists. His skin was like ice, his pulse faint, but he was still fighting. With a desperate heave, I pulled him free, dragging him onto the ice. He collapsed, shivering violently, his lips blue, his eyes darting wildly. "They're under there," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "They came from the lake." I didn't have time to process his words. He was hypothermic, seconds from slipping away. I remembered another story from Outdoor Life. Survivors on frozen lakes who'd kept moving to stay alive. "Get up," I said, hauling him to his feet. "You have to move." He stumbled, his legs barely working, but I kept him upright, forcing him to walk in circles on the ice. The storm raged around us, snow blinding, wind screaming. My own body was numb, my fingers stiff in my gloves, but I couldn't stop. If we stopped, we'd die. "Keep moving," I told him, my voice hoarse. His eyes were unfocused, his muttering incoherent, something about faces in the water, voices calling him. Hallucinations, I told myself. Hypothermia does that. But the scarf still fluttered in my peripheral vision, caught on the ice, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Hours later, when the storm began to ease, I got him back to the cabin. I wrapped him in blankets, stoked the fire, and called for help on the old radio. By the time the rescue team arrived, he was conscious, sipping hot tea, his eyes still haunted. His name was Caleb, a 16-year-old from a nearby town. He'd been walking on the lake, he said, when he heard crying, faint, like a child's voice, coming from below. He'd leaned closer, and the ice had given way. But what he saw under the water, he couldn't explain. Faces, he said, pale, indistinct, staring up at him, their hands reaching. I wanted to dismiss it as delirium, but his words clung to me. I remembered Ethan, how he'd loved this lake, how he'd talk about its secrets. It's old, he'd said once, his voice serious for a kid. Older than us. Older than everything. I'd laughed then, but now, sitting in the cabin's dim light, I wasn't so sure. The next day, I went back to the lake. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle calm. The ice was smooth again, the cracks sealed over as if it had never been. But the scarf was still there, half buried in the snow. I picked it up, my fingers tracing its frayed edges. It wasn't Ethan's, not really. The color was wrong, the fabric too new. But it felt like a message, a tether to something I couldn't understand. That night, I stayed by the stove, the scarf in my lap. The wind was quieter now, but the lake still spoke. A low hum, almost a whisper, vibrated through the cabin's walls. I tried to ignore it, but sleep wouldn't come. Around 2 a.m., another crack echoed from the lake, sharper this time, like a bone snapping. I didn't want to go out there. Every fiber of my body screamed to stay inside, to lock the door and wait for dawn. But I couldn't. Not after Caleb. Not after Ethan. I stepped onto the ice again, flashlight in hand, the cold biting deeper than before. The lake was still, the stars reflecting on its surface like a mirror. I walked toward the center, where the crack had sounded. The ice groaned again, louder now, and I froze. Something moved beneath me, a shadow, vast and formless, sliding under the ice. My breath caught. It wasn't a fish, not a current. It was too big, too deliberate. I swung my flashlight down, and for a moment I saw it, a face pale and blurred, staring up at me. Not Caleb's, not Ethan's, something else. I stumbled back, my boots slipping. The ice cracked again, a spiderweb of fractures spreading beneath me. I ran, my heart pounding, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. When I reached the shore, I didn't stop until I was inside the cabin, the door bolted behind me. My hands shook as I clutched the scarf, its fabric cold against my skin. The next morning, I found tracks on the ice. Not mine, not Caleb's, smaller, uneven, like bare feet had walked across the lake in the night. They led to the center, where the ice was smooth again, and then stopped, as if whatever made them had vanished, or sunk. I left the cabin that day, the scarf tucked into my bag. I told myself I'd never come back, but the lake's pull was stronger than my fear. Months later, I read an ABC news story about plane crash survivors who'd endured hours on frozen water, their bodies pushed beyond human limits. It should have been impossible, just like Caleb's survival, just like the hands I'd seen. But the lake didn't care about what was possible. It held its secrets close, whispering them only to those who dared to listen. I still hear it sometimes, in the quiet of the night. A faint hum, a crack, a voice that isn't there. The scarf sits in a drawer, untouched but never forgotten, and I know, deep down, that the lake isn't done with me. Story 5, Flight Over the Ice. I'm Jack Monroe, and I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. I'm a pilot, been flying small planes over Alaska's wilds for years. The Kenai Peninsula, with its jagged peaks and endless ice fields, was my backyard. But what happened out there in early 2025, on that frozen lake, changed everything. I'm not sure I'll ever make sense of it, but I'll tell you what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt. You decide what it means. It was a clear January day when we took off from Anchorage in my Cessna 206. 4 of us. Me, my wife Claire, our co-pilot Sam, and our friend Robin, a biologist studying glacial ecosystems. We were headed to a remote research station near Lake Utopia, a place nestled in the Kine's icy heart. The flight was routine, the sky a crisp blue, the mountains below dusted with fresh snow. I'd flown this route 100 times. Nothing seemed off until it did. About an hour in, a shadow passed over the instrument panel. Not a cloud, there wasn't one in sight, just a flicker, like something massive had crossed the sun. I glanced at Claire, who was staring out the window, her brow furrowed. "You see that?" she asked. I shook my head, focusing on the controls. The gauges were steady, but my gut wasn't. Sam, in the co-pilot's seat, was quiet, his eyes scanning the horizon. Robin, in the back, was scribbling notes, oblivious. Then the engine sputtered, just a hiccup at first, but enough to make my hands tighten on the yoke. "Fuel's fine," I muttered, checking the gauges. Another sputter, then a full-on choke. The prop slowed and the plane dipped. Claire's hand gripped my arm. "Jack, what's happening?" Her voice was sharp, but I didn't have an answer. Sam flipped switches, cursing under his breath as the engine coughed again. We were losing altitude fast. "Mayday, mayday," I called into the radio, but static was all I got. No signal, no response. Below us, Lake Utopia's frozen surface gleamed like a cracked mirror. "Brace," I shouted, aiming for the flattest stretch of ice I could see. The plane hit hard, skidding across the lake, metal screaming as the fuselage tore. The world spun, then stopped. Darkness. I came to with icy water seeping into my boots. My head throbbed, and my left arm felt like it was pinned under something heavy. Claire's voice cut through the fog. "Jack. Jack, wake up." She was shaking me, her face pale, her breath visible in the freezing air. We were half submerged, the plane's nose buried in a snowbank, the tail jutting up at an angle. The wing on my side was crumpled but intact, a makeshift platform above the ice. I pulled myself free, pain shooting through my arm. Claire helped me onto the wing, where the wind bit like knives. Sam was sprawled in the snow nearby, unconscious but breathing, his face bloodied from a gash on his forehead. I scanned for Robin. "Where's Robin?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Claire's eyes darted to the dark woods ringing the lake. "I don't know," she whispered. "He was right there in the back. I thought I saw him climb out." But her voice trailed off. The plane's rear door hung open, swinging in the wind. No sign of him. The cold was relentless, the temperature well below zero. My breath froze in my beard. We had to move fast. I stumbled to the cargo hold, my hands numb, and found the emergency kit. A blanket, flares, a first aid pack. Claire dragged Sam onto the wing, wrapping him in the blanket. His pulse was weak but steady. "We need shelter," I said, eyeing the wreck. The wind was picking up, howling across the ice field, carrying a sound I couldn't place. Low, almost guttural, like a distant animal's growl. I used the plane's door as a shovel, carving a snow cave against the fuselage's leeward side. Claire helped, her fingers red and shaking. We moved Sam inside, propping him against the wreck. The cave wasn't much, but it cut the wind. I lit a flare, its red glow casting long shadows across the ice. "Rescue's coming," I told Claire, though I wasn't sure I believed it. No cell signal, no radio contact. We were alone. That's when I saw them, footprints, faint, uneven tracks in the fresh snow, leading from the plane toward the woods. They were human-sized, barefoot, no boots. "Robin," I muttered, grabbing a flashlight. Claire clutched my arm. "Jack, don't." Her eyes were wide, fixed on the tracks. I followed them anyway, the beam cutting through the dark. The prints went about 50 yards, then stopped. No body, no blood, just nothing. I swung the light around, my heart pounding. The woods were silent, the trees looming like sentinels. Then I saw it, another set of prints coming back from the woods. Same size, same barefoot shape, but deeper, like whoever made them was heavier on the return. They led straight to the plane's wing, then stopped. No sign of Robin climbing back on. No scuff marks, no disturbance. Just those prints, ending at the edge of the wing, as if he'd vanished into thin air. "Jack!" Claire's shout snapped me back. She was kneeling by the snow cave, her face ghost white. "Something's out there." I ran back, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. She pointed to the ice beyond the wreck. There, pressed into the snow, was a single massive footprint, easily 3 feet long, with deep, clawed impressions at the toes. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen. Next to it, the ice was cracked, spiderwebbing around what looked like claw marks, as if something had tried to break through from below. My stomach twisted. I'd heard stories about Lake Utopia, old tales from locals about something living beneath the ice, a creature that hunted through cracks and holes, dragging prey into the depths. I'd always laughed them off. Now, staring at that footprint, I wasn't so sure. We huddled in the snow cave, the flare's light fading. Claire kept watch, her eyes scanning the dark. Sam stirred, groaning, but didn't wake. The wind carried that low growl again, closer now, vibrating through the ice. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon, my breath shallow. "Did you see Robin leave?" I whispered to Claire. She hesitated, then nodded. I thought I saw him stumble off toward the woods. He looked confused, like he didn't know where he was. I didn't tell her about the returning footprints. Instead, I asked, "Did you hear anything when he left?" She shook her head, but her eyes flicked to the ice. "I thought I saw him lean over the wing," she said softly, like he was listening to something. "Down there." She pointed to the frozen lake beneath us. The night dragged on. Every sound, the creak of ice, the moan of wind, felt like a threat. I kept the flashlight trained on the snowfield, watching for movement. Once, I thought I saw a shadow shift near the woods, but when I aimed the beam, there was nothing. Just those clawed holes in the ice, glinting in the light. My mind raced. Had Robin wandered off in a daze, like Claire said, or had something taken him? Those prints, they didn't make sense. Hours later, a faint thrum broke the silence. A National Guard helicopter, its spotlight sweeping the lake. I fired another flare, waving it like a madman. The chopper landed, medics rushing toward us. They loaded Sam onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttering open as they worked. Claire clung to me, sobbing. I told the medics about Robin, about the footprints. They searched the snowfield but found nothing. No body, no tracks beyond the ones I'd seen. Just that single monstrous print and the clawed holes, now half covered by drifting snow. In the hospital, we pieced together what we could. Sam, barely conscious, mumbled that he'd seen Robin climb out of the plane, muttering about something calling from the ice. Claire stuck to her story. Robin had wandered off, dazed, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Robin leaning over the wing, his ear pressed to the ice, like he was answering a whisper. And those footprints, coming back but never reaching the plane. The news called it a miracle. 3 survive icy crash. They didn't mention Robin. No body was ever found. The official report said he likely succumbed to the cold, his tracks erased by wind. But I know what I saw. That footprint, those claw marks, they weren't natural. And that sound, that low growl beneath the ice, it wasn't the wind. I don't fly over Lake Utopia anymore. The lake's still there, frozen and silent, keeping its secrets. Sometimes at night, I hear that growl in my dreams, feel the ice cracking beneath me. I wonder what Robin heard, what pulled him into the dark. I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next plane to fall. Story 6. The Vanished Skyer. The winter of 1978 was a cruel one, the kind that sank its teeth into your bones and didn't let go. I was 23, a college kid with too much nerve and not enough sense, chasing solitude on the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. My name is Stephen Kibaki, and this is the story of how I lost myself out there on the ice, and what I found when I went back to face it. It started with a reckless whim. The lake was a mirror of frost, stretching out under a sky heavy with stars. I strapped on my cross-country skis, slung a backpack over my shoulders, and set out alone. The air burned my lungs, sharp and clean, as my poles dug into the snow-dusted ice. I'd skied this lake before, knew its moods, but that night felt different. The wind carried a low hum, like a voice just out of reach. I shook it off, told myself it was just the cold playing tricks. Hours passed. I was miles out, the shore a faint smudge behind me, when I felt it, a shift, like the world tilted a fraction off its axis. I stopped, my breath clouding in front of me. The ice beneath my skis was smooth, unbroken, but my tracks, they just ended. Not faded, not covered by snow, ended, as if I'd stepped into nothing. I turned in a slow circle, heart pounding. The lake was silent, the stars too bright, too close. I dropped my poles, my backpack, anything to lighten my load, and started back toward shore. But the ice felt wrong, like it was watching me. I don't remember falling asleep or passing out. I don't remember anything after that. 15 months later, I woke up in a field. Not a hospital, not my dorm, a field, 40 miles from where I'd last been. I was wearing clothes I didn't recognize. A threadbare jacket, pants too short for my legs, and boots that didn't fit. In my hands were maps, crumpled and marked with places I'd never heard of. My head was a fog, thick and disorienting, like I'd been dreaming for a year and a half. The farmhouse nearby was my salvation. The couple who lived there found me stumbling in their yard, babbling about time and the lake. They said I looked like I'd walked out of a ghost story. I couldn't explain where I'd been. To me, no time had passed at all. The months that followed were a blur of questions I couldn't answer. Doctors, police, even my parents, they all wanted to know what happened. I had nothing to give them. My skis, poles and backpack were found abandoned on the lake, my tracks stopping dead in the middle of the ice. The papers called it a mystery, a vanishing act. I called it a hole in my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for me to come back. So, against every shred of reason, I did. It was February 1980 when I returned to Lake Michigan. The lake was frozen again, a vast, glassy sheet under a sky streaked with green auroras. I told myself I was there to remember, to fill in the blanks. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The lake had taken something from me, and I wanted it back, or at least to understand what it was. I skied out past the safety line, the one the locals warned never to cross. The ice was thick, they said, but not trustworthy. Fishermen at the dock had muttered stories about water babies, strange figures tied to the lake's frozen heart. I didn't believe in ghosts, but their words stuck with me, burrowing under my skin. The lake was quiet that night, the only sound my skis cutting through the snow. I reached the center, where my tracks had stopped 2 years before, and paused. My breath hung in the air, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. Then I heard it, a wail, high and childlike, slicing through the silence. It wasn't human, not entirely. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the ice. My pulse hammered in my ears. I looked down, and the ice beneath my skis was fracturing, thin cracks spreading like veins. I froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. That's when I saw him. At the edge of the lake, where the ice met the dark, a figure crept forward. A boy, pale as the snow, his clothes faded and dripping wet. His eyes were hollow, pleading, locked on mine. He couldn't have been more than 10, but there was something ancient in his gaze, something that didn't belong. My heart thudded so hard, I thought it would crack my ribs. He raised a hand, slow and deliberate, and his lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. The air grew colder, sharper, like it was cutting into me. I don't know why I moved toward him. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body acted on its own, my poles digging into the ice as I skied closer. The boy didn't move, just stood there, his hands still raised, his eyes pulling me in. The ice groaned beneath me, a low, mournful sound. Then, in an instant, he was gone. Not faded, not walked away, gone, swallowed by a pool of dark water that hadn't been there a second before. The ice around me splintered, cracks racing outward. I scrambled back, my skis slipping, and collapsed onto the surface, gasping. The lake was silent again, the auroras flickering above like nothing had happened. I didn't stay long after that. I skied back to shore, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my poles. I told no one what I saw. How could I? They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was. But that boy, that whale, those eyes, they weren't a dream. They were real as the ice under my feet. Years passed, but the lake never left me. I became a psychotherapist, maybe because I thought I could fix myself by fixing others. Every winter, the memory of that night crept back, sharp as frostbite. I'd lie awake, hearing that wail, seeing those hollow eyes. I never went back to Lake Michigan, but I couldn't escape it either. The locals still talk about the water babies, about figures seen on the ice during the coldest nights. They say the lake keeps its secrets, and sometimes it takes people to guard them. Last winter, I got a letter. No return address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper with a map. It was one of the maps I'd been holding when I woke up in that field, marked with the same strange symbols. Tucked inside was a photograph of Lake Michigan, frozen and glinting under a green aurora. On the back, in shaky handwriting, was a single line, "He's still waiting." I burned the letter, but I kept the map. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me knows I'll go back one day. The lake isn't done with me. And somewhere, out on that ice, that pale boy is still watching, his hand raised, his voice whispering words I'll never understand. Story 7, Frozen Vengeance. I am Melvin Sinclair, or what remains of me. My voice is the howl of the wind across Salt Laskin Lake, my body a shadow stitched from frost and fury. You've heard the tales, I'm sure, whispers of my death, my curse, my endless hunt for what was stolen. They're not just stories. I'm here, bound to this ice, and I'll tell you what happened, what keeps me tethered to this frozen hell. Listen close, because the truth is colder than the water that claimed me. It was 1932, the heart of the Great Depression. This town, a speck on the edge of Ontario, clung to survival like frost to a windowpane. I was a farmhand, breaking my back for pennies, dreaming of a better life. I'd saved $200, every cent scraped from years of toil, hidden in a tin under my cot. It was my ticket out, my hope for a future beyond the fields. But hope is a fragile thing, and in this town, it was a currency others coveted. The night it happened, the air was sharp enough to cut. February's grip had turned Salt Laskin Lake into a mirror of ice, smooth and treacherous. I was at the general store, trading for some flour, when I overheard them. 3 men, neighbors I'd known since boyhood, muttering about my savings. They'd seen me count it once, late at night, when I thought I was alone. Their eyes gleamed with greed, their voices low and conspiratorial. I should have known then, but trust is a fool's mistake. They came for me after dusk, their faces friendly but their words too smooth. "Melvin," they said, "let's take a walk. The lake's solid tonight, perfect for skating." I was wary, but they were my neighbors, men I'd shared meals with. I laced up my old skates, the ones with cracked leather and dull blades, and followed them out. The moon was a sliver, barely enough to light the snow-dusted ice. The lake stretched wide, its edges swallowed by pines that stood like silent sentinels. We skated for a while, their laughter too loud, their glances too sharp. Then they stopped, forming a loose circle around me. "Melvin," one said, his voice dropping, "we know about your tin. Hand it over, and we'll call it even." My stomach twisted. I tried to laugh it off, to skate away, but they closed in. The ice groaned under our weight, a low, warning crack. "Give it up," another hissed, "or we'll take it." I refused. That money was my life, my escape. I wouldn't let them have it. That's when they did it. One of them, the tallest, swung his axe, the kind used for chopping firewood. Not at me, but at the ice beneath my feet, the blade bit deep, and the lake screamed, a splintering roar that echoed in the night. I tried to move, but the ice gave way, and the cold swallowed me whole. The water was a living thing, clawing at my skin, dragging me down. I thrashed, my lungs burning, my hands scrabbling for the edge of the hole. Above, their faces stared down, not with horror, but with glee. They laughed as I sank, their voices fading into the dark. I don't know how long I fought. The cold numbed my limbs, then my thoughts. My last memory was the weight of the water, pressing me into the lake's black heart. They never found my body. The ice sealed me in, and the town moved on. But I didn't. Something, anger, maybe, or the raw injustice of it, kept me here. My soul froze to the lake, and with it came a promise. They'd pay for what they took. The first year, I didn't understand what I was. I felt the cold, the ache, but I had no form. Then, on the anniversary of that night, I rose. The ice parted, and I clawed my way out, dripping, half frozen, my clothes heavy with water that never dried. The town was quiet, but I found one of them, Jacob, the one who'd swung the axe. He was fishing alone, his lantern casting a weak glow on the ice. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He saw me, his eyes wide, his scream cut short as I grabbed him. His hands flailed, but the ice cracked again, and I pulled him under. The lake took him as it had taken me. They found his lantern the next day, but no trace of him. Just small, wet handprints trailing into the snow. The second year, it was Thomas. He'd been there that night, laughing as I drowned. I found him skating with his son, too close to the lake's center. I waited until the boy was safe on shore, then rose again. Thomas didn't see me until it was too late. His skates caught, the ice split, and I dragged him down. His son's screams carried across the lake, but I felt no pity. Only the cold and the weight of my stolen future. By the third year, the town knew. They called it a curse, whispered my name like a warning. Don't skate the lake in mid-February. Don't linger past midnight. But some were fools, like Lars in 1939. He was a lumberjack, young and brash, with a laugh that grated like a saw. He'd heard the stories but called them nonsense. That night, the sky was heavy, starless. Lars skated out alone, shouting into the dark, daring me to show myself. I obliged. I rose from the ice, my form clearer now, a dripping silhouette, my eyes hollow but burning. Lars stood his ground at first, his bravado holding. Then he saw my face, the rage in it, the teeth bared like a wolf's. He turned to run, but the ice betrayed him. A crack split the night, and I was on him. His friends, watching from the shore, fled as I pulled him through the hole. The next morning, they found his skates, one blade snapped, and those same small handprints crawling across the snow. They knew then I was real, and I was not done. Year after year, I return, not always to kill, sometimes just to remind them. I walk the ice, my footsteps heavy, my voice a rasp demanding my $200. Most stay away now, but there are always stragglers, curious souls who test the legend. In 1947, a girl named Clara wandered too far from her family's cabin. She was young, barely 16, her skates gliding in the moonlight. I didn't want her, but she was there, on my lake, at my hour. I rose and she froze, her breath clouding the air. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if she could sense my pain. I let her go, but not before she saw me, my soaked coat, my frostbitten hands, my eyes that held no mercy. She never skated again. The years blur, but the cold never fades. I feel it always, a bone-deep ache that keeps me sharp. The town has changed, new faces, new houses, but the lake remains, and so do I. In 1953, a trapper named Ellis ignored the warnings. He crossed the ice to check his lines, his lantern swinging. I found him at midnight, his back to me. He turned and his face went slack. "Melvin," he whispered, as if we were old friends. I didn't answer. The ice opened and he was gone. They found his traps still baited, but no sign of him. Just the handprints, always the handprints. I don't choose who I take. The lake decides, or maybe it's the weight of my anger. Those who cross at the wrong hour, who linger where they shouldn't, they're mine. In 1961, two brothers, reckless and bold, raced across the lake on a dare. The elder made it to shore, the younger didn't. I rose behind him, my shadow falling across the ice. He screamed, but the lake was faster. His brother never spoke of it, but he left town the next day. The whispers have grown quieter now, the town's smaller, but the fear remains. They know my name, my story. They know to avoid Saul Luskin Lake when February's chill settles in. Yet every year, someone forgets. In 1978, a photographer came, chasing tales of the ghost of the lake. He set up his tripod, his camera flashing in the dark. I watched him waiting. At midnight, I rose. His camera fell, its lens cracking on the ice. He ran, but the lake was hungry. They found his equipment half submerged, and those telltale handprints leading nowhere. I don't rest, I can't. The $200 is gone, but it's not about the money anymore. It's about what they took, my life, my chance, my warmth. I'm bound to this lake, to the ice that betrayed me, to the cold that holds me. Every year I rise, searching for them, for anyone who dares to cross my path. The ice remembers, and so do I. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay off Saul Luskin Lake when February's moon hangs low. Don't skate past midnight. Don't listen for footsteps or answer a voice that calls from the dark. I'm out there, waiting, my hands cold and my heart colder. I'm Melvin Sinclair, and I'm still owed. Story 8. Echoes on the thin _ice. I'm Anna, and I was 16 when it happened. My best friend Mia and I were restless that winter, itching for something to break the monotony of our small northern town. It was late December 2016, and the air was so cold it bit at your skin. The frozen lake on the outskirts, fringed by skeletal pines, was the kind of place that felt like it held secrets. At its edge sat an abandoned cabin, its wood warped and grey, windows like empty eyes. We'd heard the stories. Everyone had. They said a battered old boombox inside sometimes played by itself, summoning 4 phantoms from beyond the grave. Mia called it nonsense, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity. Me, I wasn't so sure, but I couldn't resist her dare. Spend the night in the cabin, turn on the boombox, and see what happened. The night was moonless when we slipped through the pines, our boots crunching on snow. My flashlight beam danced across the cabin's sagging porch. The door creaked as Mia shouldered it open, revealing a musty room littered with broken furniture. In the corner, the boombox sat like a relic, its plastic casing cracked, buttons faded. Mia grinned, her breath puffing in the cold. "Ready to debunk this ghost story?" she asked, already reaching for the power button. My stomach twisted, but I nodded, trying to match her bravado. The static hissed to life, a low growl that filled the silence. We sat on the floor, wrapped in blankets, waiting for nothing to happen. Hours passed. The static droned on, occasionally spitting garbled noise. I was starting to doze when, at midnight, the hiss cut out. Silence gripped the cabin, sharp and unnatural. Then, faintly, a melody emerged, not from the boombox, but from somewhere else, like it was seeping through the walls. It was dissonant, slow, a tune that felt like it was trying to remember itself. Mia's eyes widened. "You hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart hammering. My flashlight caught something outside the grimy window, a faint circle of light on the frozen lake, glowing softly, like a lantern under the ice. I don't know why I stood up. I don't know why I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the snow-dusted dock. The light on the ice pulsed, drawing me closer. Mia hissed my name, but my feet moved anyway, crunching onto the lake's frozen surface. The melody grew louder, wrapping around me like a thread. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft as a breath, right behind me. Come closer." I spun around. A boy stood inches from me, no older than 12. His clothes were ragged, dripping wet, as if he'd just crawled from the water. His skin was translucent, veins faintly visible beneath it, and his eyes were voids, black and endless. He smiled, sad and slow, and pointed to a jagged hole in the ice between us. My breath caught. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing me toward that dark gap. Behind him on the shore, 3 other figures flickered into view. A young girl clutching a smaller child, and a dark-haired boy, all silent, all staring at me. Their eyes weren't right. Too deep, too empty. "Hannah." Mia's voice snapped me back. She was on the dock now, her flashlight shaking. The boombox tune had changed, booming louder, a haunting lullaby I swore I'd heard before. Mia grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the cabin. "Water babies," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The stories, spirits of drowned kids. They haunt lakes, crying to lure people in." I remembered the tales then, whispers of children lost to the lake, their sobs echoing at night, pulling the curious to their doom. The ice groaned under my feet. The pale boy reached out, his fingers trembling, beckoning me toward the hole. "Trade places," he whispered, his voice like wind over water. My chest tightened. The lullaby twisted, blending with soft, thirsty sobs that seemed to come from everywhere. Mia dragged me back, her nails digging into my arm. We stumbled into the cabin, slamming the door. The boombox was screaming now, the melody jagged and wrong. I lunged for it, jamming the off button. The music screeched, then died. Silence hit like a slap. Through the window, the figures on the shore froze, flickering like bad film reels. The pale boy's hand was still outstretched, his sad smile fixed. Then the ice cracked, a sharp, bone-deep sound. The floor seemed to tilt as a sheet of ice outside broke free, splashing icy water into the air. Mia grabbed my hand, and we ran, slipping on the dock, scrambling through the snow. My lungs burned, my clothes soaked from the spray. We didn't stop until we reached the road, the cabin a dark smudge behind us. Dawn was breaking when we staggered home, numb and dripping. The boombox lay shattered on the dock, its last song etched in the snow like a warning. We didn't talk about it after, not to each other, not to anyone, but I couldn't shake the boy's face, his empty eyes, or the pull of that hole in the ice. 2 years later, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove it was real. The cabin was still there, more decayed, the boombox gone. The lake was frozen again, smooth and silent. I stood on the shore, my breath clouding in the air, and listened. Nothing. No music, no whispers, just the wind. I turned to leave, but then I heard it, a faint hum, like a lullaby carried on the breeze. I froze. The ice glinted, and for a second, I thought I saw a shadow move beneath it, small and quick, like a child darting out of sight. I haven't gone back since, but sometimes when the nights are cold and quiet, I hear that tune in my dreams. It's always the same dissonant, familiar, pulling me towards something I can't see. Mia moved away, but I know she hears it too. She texted me once, years later, just one line, "Do you still hear the music?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The lake hasn't forgotten us, and I know those children are still there, waiting under the ice, their voices soft and hungry, calling for someone to trade places. The worst part, I still feel that pull. Every winter, when the frost grips the town, I find myself staring out my window, wondering if I'd see that circle of light again, wondering if I'd step onto the ice, wondering if, this time, I'd listen. Story 9. Wraith under Silver Lake. The wind howled through the pines, a low moan that seemed to rise from the frozen heart of Silver Lake itself. I stood on its icy surface, my breath clouding in the dawn's pale light, my gloved hands gripping the drill. My name is Jake Caro, a freelance documentarian chasing stories that others dismiss as folklore. Silver Lake, remote and nestled in a dense forest, was my latest obsession. The locals in the nearby village spoke of a cargo plane that crashed here decades ago, its wreckage swallowed by the lake's depths. They whispered of divers who ventured beneath the ice and never returned, their tales laced with dread about something lingering below. I was here to capture the truth on film, to document the legend of the plane and its crew, supposedly entombed in their frozen cockpit. The ice was thick, a translucent blue that glowed faintly under the rising sun. My boots crunched as I positioned the drill, its whine cutting through the silence. The lake was unnaturally still, the surrounding trees standing like sentinels. I'd read a report on a climbing forum that mentioned the crash, a grainy account claiming the crew was trapped, their bodies preserved in the icy water. The story ignored at me, not just for its mystery, but for the way the villagers' eyes darted when they spoke of it. They didn't linger on details. They didn't need to. The lake itself felt alive, watchful. The drill broke through, and a gush of water sprayed upward, dark and cold. I set up my camera on its tripod, the red light blinking as it recorded the hole in the ice. My diving gear was heavy, the oxygen tank a familiar weight on my back. I checked my flashlight, its beam cutting through the morning mist. The plan was simple: dive, find the wreckage, film it, and surface. I'd done this before, lakes, rivers, even a flooded quarry once. But Silver Lake felt different. The air here was heavier, the silence deeper. I slipped into the water, the cold biting through my suit. The hole above me shrank as I descended, the light fading into a greenish murk. My flashlight swept the depths, catching glints of something metallic far below. The water was clear, almost too clear, like glass. My heart thudded, steady but loud in my ears. The wreckage appeared slowly, a twisted fuselage, half buried in sediment, its nose crumpled against a pile of concrete blocks. Odd, I thought. Why concrete? The plane's hull was cracked, its interior exposed like a wound. I swam closer, my camera recording every detail. Then I saw them, two pale hands, pressed against the underside of the ice above me. My breath caught, bubbles streaming from my regulator. I tilted my flashlight upward, and the beam illuminated a face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. It was a man, his features sharp despite the distortion of the water. His hair floated like a halo, and his hands clawed at the ice, desperate. I knew that face. I'd seen it in old photographs while researching the crash. Captain Gilman, the pilot. But this wasn't possible. He'd died decades ago. My pulse hammered. I swam upward, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The figure's eyes locked onto mine, and its mouth moved, forming a single word. Help. The voice wasn't in the water. It was in my head, a whisper that crawled down my spine. I pressed my hands against the ice, mirroring his, and pounded. The ice was too thick, unyielding. I fumbled for my knife, my movements clumsy in the cold. The figure's hands pressed harder, its face twisting in despair. I hacked at the ice, chips floating around me like snow. My breath came in short gasps, the regulator struggling to keep up. The figure's eyes never left mine, wide and pleading. I struck harder, and the ice cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading outward. One more hit, and it gave way. I lunged through the hole, reaching for the figure, but my hands closed on nothing. The water was empty. My flashlight darted around, finding only the wreckage below. No body, no face, just the lake, still and silent. I surfaced, gasping, my body shaking from cold and adrenaline. The camera on the tripod was still recording, its red light steady. I climbed onto the ice, my legs trembling, and sat there, staring at the hole. The water was calm again, as if nothing had happened. I rewound the footage, my hands shaking as I watched the screen. There I was, diving, descending, filming the wreckage. But when the camera panned upward, there was nothing, no hands, no face, just the ice and the greenish water. I rewound again, my stomach twisting. Had I imagined it? The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the lake. I packed my gear, my movements mechanical. The forest was silent, but I felt watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against me. I drove back to the cabin I'd rented, a small wooden structure at the edge of the village. The fire I lit did little to warm me. I played the footage again, frame by frame, searching for something I might have missed. Nothing. Just the wreckage and the empty water. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside sounded like whispers, and the cabin's walls creaked as if the lake itself was pressing against them. I kept seeing those eyes, that word, help, echoing in my mind. I grabbed my notebook, scribbling what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. The crash had happened in the 1950s, a cargo plane carrying supplies, not passengers. The crew of 3, Captain Gilman, a co-pilot, and a navigator, had perished. No one knew why the plane went down. Mechanical failure, they said, but the concrete blocks I'd seen didn't fit. They weren't part of a plane. The next morning, I returned to the lake. The hole was still there, its edges slightly melted but intact. I didn't dive again, not yet. Instead, I walked the perimeter, my boots sinking into the snow. The pines loomed, their branches heavy with frost. I found a path, barely visible, leading into the forest. It wasn't on any map, but it felt deliberate, like someone had walked it before. I followed it, my breath shallow, until I reached a clearing. There, half buried in the snow, was a concrete block, identical to the ones I'd seen underwater. It was weathered, moss clinging to its edges, but it didn't belong here. I brushed the snow away, revealing a faint inscription, Property of U.S. Army, 1953. My mind raced. The crash was in 1955. Why were there army blocks here, and why were they underwater? I took photos, my hands unsteady. The clearing felt wrong, the air too still. I heard a crack behind me, like a branch snapping, but when I turned, there was nothing, just the trees and the snow. I hurried back to the lake, my heart pounding. That afternoon, I visited the village library, a small building with creaking floors and dusty shelves. The librarian, an older woman with sharp eyes, watched me as I pulled records from the 1950s. I found a single article about the crash, buried in a local paper. It mentioned the plane, but nothing about its cargo. Another file, marked restricted, caught my eye. I wasn't supposed to see it, but the librarian was distracted. It was a military report, brief and vague, mentioning experimental materials on the plane. No details, just a warning. Do not approach crash site. I drove back to the lake at dusk, unable to stay away. The ice glowed faintly under the fading light, and the hole was still there, a dark eye staring up at the sky. I didn't dive, but I set up the camera again, this time with a night vision lens. I sat on the ice, watching the screen, waiting. Hours passed, the cold seeping into my bones. Then a flicker on the screen. A shadow moved beneath the ice, too large to be a fish. I leaned closer, my breath catching. The shadow grew, taking shape, hands, a face, those same wide eyes. Captain Gilman again, or something wearing his face. It pressed against the ice, its mouth moving. Help. I stumbled back, the camera tipping over. The shadow vanished, but the ice groaned, a low guttural sound that vibrated through my boots. I grabbed the camera and ran, my flashlight bouncing wildly. Back at the cabin, I locked the door, my hands shaking as I reviewed the footage. There it was, the shadow, the face, clear as day. I hadn't imagined it. Something was down there, something that knew me, that wanted me to see it. The next day, I didn't go to the lake. I couldn't. Instead, I delved deeper, searching online forums and old records. A post on an obscure diving site mentioned Silver Lake, claiming the military had used it for tests in the 1950s. No details, just rumors of strange equipment dumped in the water. The concrete blocks, I realized, weren't random. They were anchors, meant to keep something down. But what? That night, the whispers returned, louder now, seeping through the cavern's walls. I heard my name, faint but clear, carried on the wind. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed my gear and drove to the lake one last time. The hole was frozen over, a thin layer of ice sealing it shut. I didn't drill again. I didn't need to. I knew what was down there wasn't just a wreck. It was something else, something that had seen me, that had spoken to me. As I turned to leave, the ice cracked behind me, a sharp, deliberate sound. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove, the lake's reflection fading in my rearview mirror. The footage is still on my camera, unedited, unwatched since that night. I don't know if I'll ever share it. Some secrets, I've learned, are better left buried. Story 10. Whispers in the Ice. I'm Mia Henriksen, a sound engineer with a knack for capturing the whispers of the world, wind through pines, the creak of frost, the hum of untouched places. My work takes me to remote corners, where silence speaks louder than cities ever could. Last winter, I set out for Langsjön, a frozen lake tucked deep in the Nordic wilderness, to record natural ambiances for a project. The plan was simple: a week alone, just me, my recorder, and the vast, quiet cold. I'd heard the local tales as a kid, stories of strange songs on the wind, of voices beneath the ice, but I never paid them much mind. Myths are just stories, right? That's what I told myself as I hiked toward the lake, my boots crunching through fresh snow, the air sharp in my lungs. The trail to Langsjön was a narrow scar through dense forest, pines heavy with frost. The sky was a pale grey, the kind that promises more snow. My breath puffed out in clouds, and the only sound was the rhythmic squeak of my steps. I'd been warned the lake stayed frozen solid until spring, a mirror of ice stretching over a kilometre across. Safe, they said, but as I crested the final hill and saw Langsjön below, something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too thick, like the forest was holding its breath. I shook it off, set up my small camp near the shore, a tent, a stove, my recording gear, and started scouting. By dusk, I was out on the ice, testing my equipment. The lake was a glassy expanse, its surface dusted with snow that swirled in the faint wind. I adjusted my headphones, listening to the soft hiss of my recorder, picking up the creak of ice settling, the distant groan of wind through the trees. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like a melody carried from far away. It wasn't the wind, it was too clear, too deliberate. A wordless song, sweet and mournful, weaving through the pines. I froze, my heart kicking up a notch. I turned slowly, scanning the empty shore, the dark wall of trees. Nothing, just me and the lake. The sound grew louder, closer, as if it was coming from across the ice. It was beautiful, like a lullaby sung by a child, but there was something wrong with it, something cold, like the notes were dipped in frost. My skin prickled. I remembered a story from my childhood, one my grandmother used to tell: freshwater sirens, voices that sang beneath the ice, luring the curious to places they shouldn't go. I'd laughed it off as a kid, but out here, alone, it didn't feel so funny. I checked my recorder, still running, capturing every note. The song seemed to curl around my name, Mia, soft and teasing, like it knew me. I should have turned back then. I should have packed up and hiked out. But I'm stubborn, and curiosity has always been my weakness. I stepped onto the ice, cautious, testing each step. The surface was solid, thick enough to hold my weight, but the song pulled me forward, a thread tugging at my chest. The further I went, the louder it got, until it felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. I reached the center of the lake, where the ice was clearest, like polished glass. My recorder hummed in my hands, the red light steady. I crouched, pressing the mic closer to the surface, and that's when it happened. A tap, sharp, deliberate, from beneath the ice. Then another, and another, like knuckles rapping on a door. My breath caught, my pulse hammering in my ears. I stared down, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, For a split second, I saw her. A girl pale as bone, her hair swirling like ink in the water below. Her eyes were wide, luminous, locked on mine, her mouth moving as if singing. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the ice. The song stopped, replaced by a low, grinding groan, like the lake itself was waking up. "Get a grip, Mia," I muttered to myself, my voice shaking. Hallucinations, I thought. The solitude, the cold, the endless dark, it messes with your head. I'd read about it. People alone too long start seeing things, hearing things. But my recorder didn't lie. I rewound the tape, my fingers clumsy in my gloves, and played it back. There it was, the song, my name, the taps. Clear as day. My stomach twisted. This wasn't in my head. Night was falling fast, the sky bruising purple. I needed to get back to camp, but when I turned, the shore looked wrong, too far, too unfamiliar. The trail I'd followed was gone, buried under fresh snow or swallowed by the shifting landscape. I cursed under my breath, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but it only made the lake feel bigger, more alive. The ice groaned again, louder this time, and I felt it shift under my feet. Not a crack, not yet, but a warning. I started walking, fast, toward the dim line of trees, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then the whisper came, "Mia," soft, childlike, from beneath the ice. I stopped dead, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The voice was closer now, right under me. I looked down, and there she was again, the girl, her face pressed against the underside of the ice, her eyes glowing like twin moons. Her lips moved, forming my name, but no sound came from her mouth. Instead, the whisper came from all around, seeping up through the cracks in the ice. My knees buckled. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I ran. My boots skidded, my breath ragged, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The ice groaned louder, a deep, guttural sound, like the lake was angry I was leaving. I didn't dare look down, didn't dare look back, but I felt her eyes on me, her voice chasing me. "Don't look back," it whispered, and I didn't know if it was a warning or a taunt. The shore was closer now, the trees looming, but the ice was changing, cracks spiderwebbing out from where I'd stood, spreading like veins. I could hear them snapping, sharp and brittle, as I sprinted. I reached the forest edge and collapsed, my chest heaving, tears freezing on my cheeks. Only then did I look back. The lake was still under the moonlight, but the ice was alive, trembling with faint, pale ripples radiating from the center. My recorder was still in my hand, the red light blinking. I didn't play it back. I couldn't, not yet. The next morning, I packed up and hiked out, my legs like lead, my mind replaying every sound, every glimpse of that face. Back in the village, I tried to act normal, but people noticed. They asked why I was back early, why my hands shook when I held my coffee. I didn't tell them. I couldn't. But late at night, in my rented room, I finally played the tape. The song was there, clearer than I remembered, woven with my name. And the taps, slow, deliberate, like a code. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed out on the lake. A second voice, fainter, layered beneath the first. It wasn't singing. It was whispering over and over, "Stay." I left Langton the next day, but the lake didn't leave me. Weeks later, back in the city, I'd wake up hearing that song in my dreams, feeling the ice shift under my feet. I stopped taking jobs in remote places. I stopped listening to my old recordings, but sometimes when it's quiet, I hear it, a faint, sweet melody, calling my name, and I wonder if I ever really left that lake. The next winter, I got a call from another sound engineer, someone I'd trained with years ago. He was heading to Langston, chasing rumors of strange sounds. "You were there, right?" he asked, his voice crackling over the line. Anything I should know. I wanted to tell them to stay away, to burn his gear and forget the job. Instead, I said, "Just don't go out on the ice." He laughed, said I sounded spooked. I didn't argue. 2 weeks later, he stopped answering his phone. His team found his camp, his gear, his recorder, but no trace of him. The tape in his recorder was blank, except for one faint sound, a childlike voice singing a name that wasn't his. I keep my own tape locked in a drawer, unplayed, but sometimes, when the wind howls outside, I swear I hear it, her voice, under the floorboards, under the earth, calling me back to the ice. Story 11. Frostbite. I'm Emma Miller, and I'm telling you this because I need someone to know what happened at Blackwood Lake. My family, Greg, my husband, and our kids, Anya and Sam, thought we were in for a quiet ice fishing trip. Just us, the North Woods, and the frozen lake. It was supposed to be a break from the grind, a chance to hear the kids laugh and feel the cold snap our cheeks red. But something was waiting under the ice, something that didn't belong in any world I understand. I'm not here to explain it. I'm here to tell you what I saw, what I felt, and what I lost. It was mid-morning when we arrived at Blackwood Lake, the air so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. The lake stretched out like a sheet of smoked glass, miles of ice glinting under a weak January sun. Greg was already unloading the gear from the snowmobile, his breath puffing in clouds as he wrestled with the auger. Anya, our 8-year-old, was bundled in so many layers she waddled like a penguin, giggling as she tried to help. Sam, 11 and too cool for mittens, was skating lazy circles nearby, his blades scratching the ice. I was setting out bait, minnows in a bucket, their silvery bodies twitching, when I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of the ice beneath us. Greg started drilling the first hole. The auger whined, chewing through the ice, and I remember him grinning at me, his eyes crinkling above his scarf. "Gonna catch us a big one today, Em," he said. Then the drill lurched. It broke through too fast, like it had hit a pocket of nothing. Water gushed up, black and oily, though we were miles from the shore where the lake should have been shallow. Greg frowned, muttering about currents or air pockets. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, like someone was watching. I glanced at the ice beneath my boots. It was cloudy, but for a second, I saw something move down there, a shadow, quick and wrong. We shook it off, kept drilling, kept baiting hooks. Sam skated farther out, his figure shrinking against the vast white. Hours passed, and the wind picked up, stinging my face. I called for Sam to come back, but he didn't answer. My stomach twisted. "Greg, where's Sam?" I said, my voice sharper than I meant. He looked up, squinting, and pointed to the shore. There was Sam, standing alone by the tree line, his skates dangling from one hand. He was just staring at the ice. We trudged over, Anya clinging to my glove. Up close, Sam's face was pale, his lips tinged blue. "I thought I heard something," he whispered, pointing at the ice. "Under there, like scratching." His voice was small, not like him at all. I followed his gaze and saw it, a faint red smear on the ice, like someone had dragged a bloody finger. Then I noticed his leg. His snow pants were torn, and a deep scratch ran from his shin to his knee, blood seeping through. "Sam, what happened?" I asked, kneeling. He shook his head, eyes wide. It felt like something grabbed me, something solid. Greg crouched beside me, inspecting the wound. "Maybe he caught a skate," he said, but his voice was tight. The scratch didn't look like a cut from metal. It was jagged, like teeth. A wet, sour smell hung around it, like rotting fish. I cleaned it with snow, but Sam winced, and the blood kept coming. By the time we got back to the fishing camp, a small trailer we'd rented near the lake, the scratch was swelling, the edges turning an ugly purple black. I tried to stay calm for Anya, who was asking why Sam was hurt. "It's just a scrape," I lied, but my hands were shaking as I bandaged it. Inside the trailer, things got worse. Sam's leg was oozing now, a thick, dark fluid that stained the gauze. Greg tried to distract him, telling stories about fishing trips from his childhood, but Sam wasn't listening. He kept staring out the window toward the lake. "It's still out there," he said, so quiet I almost missed it. I followed his gaze. The ice was still, but that smell, the sickly, wet stench, was stronger now, seeping through the cracks in the trailer's walls. Greg suggested it was a fish bite, maybe a muskie or a big pike. They can get aggressive, he said, but Sam shook his head. It wasn't a fish. It was heavy, like a clamp. Before I could press him, a low moan cut through the air, coming from outside. Not human, not animal, something else, deep and resonant, like a machine groaning underwater. Greg grabbed a flashlight and peered through the frosted window. Probably just the wind, he said, but his knuckles were white. Then we saw lights. Another snowmobile, its engine growling as it approached. Two figures, a man and a teenage boy, were unloading gear from a trailer. Relief hit me like a wave. They can help, I said, banging on the window. Greg waved them over, but before they could reach us, something moved on the lake. Fast, a shadow under the ice, bigger than a man, darting toward the hole Greg had drilled earlier. The ice cracked, loud as a gunshot, and something broke through. I'll never forget it. It was like a sturgeon, but wrong. Its body was wide, maybe 2 feet across, with a flattened head and a mouth full of needle-like teeth. Barnacle-crusted tentacles, 10, maybe more, writhed from its underside, slapping the ice. Its eyes were huge, yellow, and alive with hunger. The man screamed, stumbling back, but the thing was faster. One tentacle whipped out, wrapping his leg, and yanked him through the jagged hole. Water splashed, red mixing with black. The boy froze, then bolted for their trailer, screaming. Anya was sobbing, her face buried in my coat. Sam just stared, his face drained of color. Greg grabbed a crowbar from our gear, his hands shaking. "Stay here," he told me, but I couldn't move. The creature was gone, but the ice was still now, too still. That moan came again, louder, from under the lake. We dragged the kids into our trailer and locked the door. The boy from the other family pounded on it, begging to be let in. Greg opened it just long enough for him to stumble inside, his face streaked with tears. "It took my dad," he kept saying. "It took him." We huddled in the dark, the trailer's walls creaking. The wind was howling now, but it wasn't just wind. There was a tapping, deliberate, rhythmic, on the roof. T-G-U-M-P, T-G-U-M-P. Then a wet, rasping sound, like something dragging itself across the metal. Anya whimpered, and I held her tighter, my heart hammering. Sam was clutching his leg, the bandage soaked through. The smell was unbearable now, filling the trailer. I looked at Greg, and he nodded. We couldn't stay here. Before we could move, the roof buckled, glass shattered, and a slimy, massive head forced its way through. Its mouth gaped, rows of teeth glinting, and a tentacle shot out, wrapping Sam's arm. He screamed, high and raw, as it yanked him toward the hole. Greg roared, tackling the thing, slamming the crowbar into its eye. The creature screeched, a sound that made my ears ring, and its tentacles thrashed, knocking over the table. I grabbed the shotgun from under the bench, my hands slit with sweat. I fired, once, twice. The blast lit up the trailer, and the creature recoiled, its tentacles flailing. But it didn't let go of Sam. With a final heave, it dragged him through the hole in the roof, into the night. Water splashed somewhere outside, and then silence. Greg's scream tore through me. He lunged for the hole, but I grabbed him, pulling him back. "You can't," I sobbed. "It's gone." The boy from the other family was curled in a corner, muttering. Anya was shaking, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know how long we sat there, listening to the wind and the faint, awful tapping from the lake. When dawn came, the lake was quiet. I stepped outside, the shotgun still in my hands. The ice looked untouched. No holes, no cracks, just smooth, endless white. But I knew better. Something was still down there, sliding through the dark water, waiting. I got Anya and the boy into the snowmobile. Greg wouldn't come. He stayed by the lake, staring at the ice, calling Sam's name until his voice broke. I drove away, Anya's arms around my waist, the boy silent beside her. The lake shrank in the rear view, but I could still feel it watching. The local news called it a freak accident, said the ice must have given way. They found the other man's body, but not Sam's. Greg stayed at the lake for days, searching, until he couldn't anymore. I don't know what it was we saw, what took our son. All I know is Blackwood Lake isn't just a lake. It's a trap, hiding something old and hungry. And it's still there, under the ice, waiting for the next family to drill a hole. Story 12. The Voort Specters. I am Janet van der Voort, or perhaps I am Rosetta. It's hard to say now, after so long. The years blur like frost on a window pane, and our names, once so distinct, tangle in the cold air of memory. We were sisters, bound by love and defiance, and now we are something else entirely. If you're reading this, you've heard the tales of the specters in Central Park, the crimson and purple figures gliding over the ice. That's us, or what's left of us. Let me tell you our story, not as the living whisper it, but as we endure it, night after frozen night. It was 1880, and New York City was a beast of stone and smoke. Rosetta and I lived in a gilded cage, a towering brownstone on Fifth Avenue where Father's rules were iron. He was a man of wealth and control, his eyes sharp as the edge of a skate. We were his treasures, but treasures to be locked away, not cherished. Proper ladies do not wander, he'd say, his voice a low growl. But we were not proper ladies. We were sisters who craved the wind in our hair, the bite of winter on our cheeks, the thrill of freedom. And so we defied him. Central Park was our sanctuary, its frozen pond our rebellion. We'd slip out under the cover of dusk, Rosetta in her crimson cloak, me in my purple one, our skirts swishing as we tied on our silver skates. The ice was our stage, and we danced upon it in perfect unison, carving figure eights that shimmered under the gaslights. We'd laugh, our breath puffing in the cold, our hands clasped as we spun faster, faster, until the world was a blur of ice and stars. Those were the moments we lived for, the only moments we were truly ourselves. But freedom has a price. One bitter February night, as we skated, a shadow moved at the edge of the pond. I thought it was Father, come to drag us home. But it wasn't. It was something else. Tall, formless, a smear of darkness against the snow. Its presence made the air heavier, the cold sharper. Rosetta saw it too. Her grit on my hand tightened. "Janet," she whispered, "it's watching us." We skated faster, trying to outrun it, but the shadow followed, silent and relentless. It didn't speak, didn't move closer, but it was always there, just out of reach, a stain on the night. We didn't tell Father. He'd never believe us, and worse, he'd forbid us from returning to the park. So we kept our secret, and we kept skating. But the shadow returned, night after night. Sometimes it was a flicker at the corner of my eye, sometimes a weight pressing on my chest as I glided. Rosetta swore she heard it hum, a low, tuneless sound that vibrated in her bones. I felt it too, like a pulse beneath the ice. We should have stopped. We should have stayed home. But the pond called to us, and we were too stubborn, too alive, to resist. Then came the illness. It struck Rosetta first, a fever that burned through her in days. She'd lie in her bed, her crimson cloak draped over a chair like a wound, muttering about the shadow. "It's waiting, Janet," she'd say, her eyes glassy. "It's waiting on the ice." I held her hand, promising she'd be well, that we'd skate again. But she didn't. She died on a Tuesday, her breath stopping as the clock struck midnight. I was inconsolable, but Father locked me in my room, saying grief was unladylike. He didn't know I was already sick. My own fever came swiftly, a fire in my veins that no doctor could quench. As I lay dying, I saw the shadow again, not outside but in the room, crouched at the foot of my bed. It was shapeless yet solid, its edges fraying like smoke. It didn't speak, but I felt its intent. It wanted us, wanted our joy, our defiance, our endless dance on the ice. When my heart stopped, I thought it was over. I was wrong. Death was not an end, but a tether. I woke, or rather, I became on the pond, my skates gliding over ice that gleamed like glass. Rosetta was there, her crimson cloak vivid against the snow. We were as we'd always been, side by side, our movements a mirror of each other. But something was wrong. The air was too still, the stars too sharp. We weren't alone. The shadow was there, closer now, its form less vague. It had eyes, or something like them, glinting like frost in the moonlight. And it wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting. We skated, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. The ice held us, bound us, as if our defiance in life had chained us to this place in death. Night after night, we carved our figure eights, the shadow trailing us like a hunter. Sometimes it would vanish, only to reappear closer, its hum louder, more insistent. We tried to leave the pond, to glide toward the city, but the ice stretched endlessly, a frozen prison that looped back on itself. We were trapped, and the shadow knew it. Years passed, or maybe centuries. Time is a fog when you're dead. The city changed. Horses gave way to machines, gaslights to electric glow. But the pond remained, and so did we. People began to see us, their faces pale with fear or wonder. They'd whisper of the Voort Specters, the crimson and purple ghosts who skated in silence. Some came at night, hoping to catch a glimpse. Others stumbled upon us by chance, their breath catching as we glided past, our skates never touching the ice. Once, a man saw us in summer, when the pond was just grass and mud. He screamed, claiming we floated on air, our cloaks billowing in a wind he couldn't feel. We didn't care. We only wanted to escape the shadow. It grew bolder with time. One night, as we spun in our endless dance, it stepped onto the ice. Not a shape anymore, but a figure, tall, cloaked, its face a void where features should have been. It skated with us, matching our pace, its movements a mockery of our own. Rosetta reached for my hand, her touch cold as the ice beneath us. "It's closer, Janet," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wants to take us." I didn't ask where. I knew it wasn't a place we'd want to go. We tried to fight it. We skated faster, our figure eights tighter, more desperate. But the shadow was always there, gliding effortlessly, its hum now a roar that drowned out the world. It didn't touch us, not yet, but it was patient. It knew we couldn't run forever. Sometimes it would vanish for weeks, leaving us to skate in uneasy peace, but it always returned, stronger, hungrier. Once it reached out, its formless hand brushing my cloak. The cold burned, not like ice, but like fire, and for a moment, I saw nothing but darkness, a void where even the pond didn't exist. The living tell our story now, a tale of two sisters bound by love, doomed to haunt the ice. They don't know the truth. They don't know about the shadow, or the way it watches, waiting for the night we falter. They don't know that we skate not for joy, but for survival, each figure eight a defiance of the thing that hunts us. Rosetta and I hold hands, our fingers locked as they were in life, but our laughter is gone. The ice is our cage, the shadow our jailer, and every glide is a battle we're losing. Last night it spoke, not in words, but in a feeling, a weight that pressed against my mind. It wants us to stop, to surrender, to let it take us into that void. I felt Rosetta's hand tremble in mine, and I knew she heard it too. We skated faster, our cloaks a blur of crimson and purple, but the shadow matched us, its form now almost human, its eyes brighter, crueler. It's closer than ever, and I'm afraid. Not of death. We're already dead, but of what comes after, of what it will do when it finally claims us. If you're in Central Park, under a full moon or in the dead of winter, you might see us. Two figures, one red, one purple, gliding in perfect unison. You might think it's beautiful, a ghostly ballet frozen in time. But look closer. See the shadow at the edge of the ice, the one that moves when we move, the one that hums with a hunger older than the city itself. And if you hear that hum, if you feel that cold, run. Don't look back. Don't try to help us. We are Janet and Rosetta van der Voort, and we are bound to this ice, to this dance, to this shadow, and we are running out of time.